This is out of band today, and this is one of the big, kind of feature sets that it's an important part of the Uplogix product. And out of band, it's one of those things that isn't really well defined in the industry. So we just like to talk about it a little bit first. Basically, when we say out of band, we just mean some type of network communication that we can use when your primary network isn't working, right? It's a secondary access path of some type or another. And so you can imagine there's a lot of different flavors for that. Basically the idea is, that we want to be able to get you access to your equipment even when there's a problem with the network. And so, for us, that involves, designing the solution that uses and has a second, network connection or dial-in connection for us to use. Because of the way that our software is designed, we try to help you enforce security policies even if there's an outage. So, for example, users logging in over dial-up when there's an outage, the local manager might not be able to reach the TACAX servers, but we try to, cache passwords so that you can still log in with your proper user ID, and we know who's doing what, and that sort of thing. Users are still able to get access to the appropriate resources. And because you're going through the Uplogix, we have all the logging that we do for user sessions, changes, and all that sort of thing. We have a number of different ways that we can set up that out-of-band connection, right? And you guys are mostly using dial-up with POTS lines, or dial-in, really, but it's still a standard POTS lines or the BRI lines, like Anthony was saying. We also have a number of different cellular modems that we support. They're in the Uplogix there. We also have an option for using low Earth orbit satellite with the Iridium satellite network. That's mostly useful for people in really remote locations where there's no cell, no telco, no nothing, right? And then also the Uplogix can be configured to use its secondary Ethernet connection. A lot of the times in a data center or locations like that, there will be multiple circuits feeding the network. And so, we can put our secondary Ethernet on a separate, on a backup network a lot of the time and use that. And we also have the ability to connect to virtual modems. And there's, like it says, a lot of different hardware that we connect to. So, like I said, just to get into a little bit more detail, V9d2 modems, these are the old school dial-up, dial-in modems, right? They use a RJ11 jack, right? Analog phone line plugs. And they can operate in two different modes, right? We have mobile originated and mobile terminated. So, the one that you guys are mostly doing is mobile terminated. Mobile originated is more like the old dial-up internet days, where the Uplogix would connect to a RAS server that gives us an IP address. That technology is pretty much gone. I don't think I've really seen that actually working hardly anywhere. So, like I said, you guys are doing mobile terminated, where you dial into the Uplogix and it just answers your call and gives you a serial terminal session over the phone line. And yeah, for security on that, we have caller ID ACLs. That's the main thing, but we also have some other features around how that works that I'll show you in the actual control center. Things like dial back or ring back, I think are the names for those. So we have also cellular modems, which, like Anthony said, we're starting to test those for you guys, trying them out in the labs. And they work a little bit differently, right? They, just like your cell phone or, tablets these days and laptops, a lot of them have a cellular modem built in. They will, get an IP address for the Uplogix to use when the in-band network is unavailable. And pretty much this slide is a little out of date. We don't have the external, I don't think they really make those anymore. So we just have a handful of different internal modems that use. For the States, for the US, we pretty much all use just one model. That's our combo modem, which is an LTE modem that's got great performance. Some of those places where it's really hard to get a good signal, we also support these new modems called Cat1 that use a slower the data rates are slower on those modems, but their propagation is better because of the wavelength that the radios use in them. So anyway, we have a number of options for the cellular, to get you, good signal, even if you're in like a bunker-like data center. A lot of the times, those Cat 1s and an external antenna will let us use those there. And of course, yeah, you guys will, be working with, different providers to get the service yourself for that. The Iridium modems, they're fun. Like I said, you guys aren't really using these, but that's a global polar satellite network of telco satellites essentially that provide a global telco network. And so we can use that if you have someplace out in the middle of Alaska, or someplace with no signal at all, rural Wyoming, things like that. For that, we have, it's two different pieces. Basically, there's a above deck unit that has the actual antenna and modem in it, and then the Uplogix and everything else is usually separated from that by a RS422 cable for that. Now, secondary Ethernet, this one's really flexible, right? Like we said in the kind of intro sections last week and the week before. Secondary Ethernet has a couple different modes it can be put into. And if we put it into the out-of-band mode, basically you just connect it up to any router switch. You use our secondary Ethernet, the Gigabit Ethernet 1 or 2, depending on which model. You just plug it into whichever router switch or system is going to be giving us the out-of-band connection. And IPv4, 6 is supported. And we can support either static or dynamic IPs on that. So we can DHCP an address from any network that you want to attach us to, and then we can use that for our out-of-band connection when the primary network is no good. I should note, yeah, this feature uses that same secondary Ethernet, so WAN traffic failover won't work with this mode. That's mostly designed to work with the cellular, actually. So we can also connect to virtual modems. If you've got a modem somewhere on your internal network that's close to the Uplogix, we can always connect to that over the local network and use it for our out-of-band connection. We basically just have to tell it where it's at, right? What's the IP address of the system? Are we going over there via SSH, or are we using Telnet to connect to it? And then it'll give you options to enter usernames and passwords if you need to for SSH. So another option if you've got that. So this is talking about the dial-in modems, the V9d2s again. Most the cellular modems they'll use the kind of phone home system that's the same when the V9d2s are dialing up and getting an IP. Basically, what we do is we test the network continuously, and when we see that there's an outage, we turn on the out-of-band connection. If that's secondary Ethernet, then we get a address from them and use that. If it's cellular, then we get an IP from the cellular network and then probably VPN back into your network. If that's the V9d2s, then that would be the Uplogix calling, just like the old ISP days, a modem somewhere that would answer. It would give the Uplogix an IP address over that phone line, and then we would have what that's called a PPP connection, point-to-point protocol. The V9d2s and the Iridiums, they also support the dial-in mode, where basically if you're in your NOC, you're working from home, wherever you may be, you connect to a modem, you dial the phone number for the Uplogix modem, and the Uplogix answers and gives you a username and password prompt. And we call that dial-in or mobile terminated. And that's what you guys are using almost everywhere. So when you need to connect to an Uplogix, in the control center, there's a dial button. You can click that. It'll connect to a modem, and then it'll dial a phone number for you automatically. And we'll show you what that looks like in one of you guys' production ones here in a bit. So when it comes time to configure them, for the most part, they auto-configure. Basically, if you insert a modem and power the Uplogix up, it's going to mostly automatically detect it and initialize it. But you can always use config init to manually configure it if you need to. Some of the older modems that we don't really support anymore require that. So, this is kind of a summary of that. V9d2, you guys don't need to do anything. It'll automatically be configured um, in terms of the config in it. Controlling how dial-up works, that we'll get into that. There's a little configuration for that. But then, same with the cellular. On boot up, the internal cellular modems will be automatically detected and configured for usage. And then the rest, like I said, cellular USB and DB9, those are pretty much not available anymore, so you don't really have to worry about that. But Iridium requires a little bit more configuration than the cellular or the V9d2. You do have to run config in it and tell it that it's an Iridium, but then, yeah, from there it's pretty simple. And yeah, if you're ever setting one of these up and you want to make sure things are working, you can always terminal into the modem, and that's going to connect you to the modem's AT interface, which if you've been in telco long enough, you're familiar with that. That's it's a terminal that lets you interact with the modem and to tell it to dial numbers and things like that. If you want to check that a modem is connected and it looks good for use, you can always terminal in. Just type AT and enter, and it should give you an OK back. Any modem really. It should answer that same way. So that's a good basic test for, is this modem configured? Is it connected? Can I talk to it? Just terminal in, give it an AT, and see if it comes back with that OK. By default, for security reasons, the modems are not configured to answer, out of the factory. So we have to turn that on, and this should all be enabled in your Uplogix control center hierarchy. So you probably shouldn't have to actually do this, except for maybe if you're deploying some new ones or troubleshooting. But basically, if you type config answer at the command line, or like I said, these exist in the GUI as well. In order to have them answer, you need to enable that. So you just tell it, enable. And then by default, we use a caller ID to identify incoming calls, right? If you don't have a list of allowed numbers built up, then most people will do an allow all. That just means that they'll answer a call from any phone number. And then you can also adjust things like how many rings before it picks up there, and things like that. For the most part, you shouldn't really, other than enabling it, for the V9d2s, you shouldn't have to do too much of this config answer stuff. Now, some modems require initialization strings. For the most part, those are going to be automatically configured at this point. It used to be you had to configure them manually a little bit, but now on boot up, the Uplogix just detects your modem. It sets your init strings to what they should be, and you should be pretty good to go in terms of this stuff. So just enabling for those dial-in V9d2s is probably the only thing you're going to have to do in config answering. There's some other options that live in there for some features that we'll talk about in a moment. Now, if you're using your V9d2s to dial up and get an IP connection from a dial-up server, we need to configure that a little bit. You need to tell it what phone number to call when it's going to dial up like that, basically. And usually there's a username and password, and then you're either going to be static or dynamic IP. Like I said, this is a technology that's almost totally deprecated now, so you probably will never see that. But that's how you configure it. Now, once you dial up, if you get an IP address, right, so it doesn't apply for your dial-in, but if you're using any type of IP for out-of-band, we can support a VPN over that connection. Basically, once you configure that, anytime the Uplogix turns on, it's out-of-band and gets an IP, whether that's from the cellular network or secondary Ethernet, we're then going to try to connect to this configured VPN. For that, we support both IPsec and PPTP VPNs. PPTP is pretty much also deprecated, so almost everybody's doing IPsec, and we support IKE v1 and 2 for that. So a lot of different options for your security protocols with that. So this is kind of, just how the workflow is with our software. If we've got an Uplogix with the V9d2, right? Um, we're continuously monitoring the network. So, step one there, we see the network's down. In this scenario, that's a problem with the router. When we detect that outage, what we do is we go ahead, connect to the modem on the POTS line. We dial the number to the modem or remote access server that's answering. It gives us a PPP session, which includes an IP and maybe a VPN. And then your Uplogix is back in the network. It's talking to the control center over that out-of-band connection. And if users need to, they can SSH on in because that's an IP-based connection, right? So um, that test, that pulse test, that's our best way the easiest way to test the network and activate out-of-band. So when you turn that on, it checks the network every 30 seconds. And for the most part, it's doing a check that it can reach the control center. But we can also test the ability to reach up to 3 endpoints total with that. Now, we test every 30 seconds, and if we see that the network's down or if that test fails for 2 minutes, we then go ahead and turn on whatever out-of-band connection we have configured. The Uplogix changes the default gateway to that out-of-band path, and hopefully then it's going to give you, backfill your network tools, give your users access, all that good stuff. That test, Pulse, it's actually an echo request, which is another old protocol that's been around for a long time. It's basically just, it goes on TCP port 7, it sends one character to the echo server, and the echo repeats that character back. And if we don't see that, then we know that the WAN is no good. So when you configure that on a system, you can do it on the command line config system pulse. Again, this is the type of thing that you guys will probably set in the hierarchy when you're rolling out cellular. This doesn't affect your dial-in system really. So it's probably not going to be used for the time being. But once we get cellular going more, this will be how we'll control that. It's like a dead man switch if you're familiar with that idea. Cellular works just the same, except for instead of over the POTS line, we're going over the cellular network. And the IP part of it is a little bit less cumbersome, right? You don't need a RAS server anymore because the cellular network takes care of all that. So same thing, we're testing the in-band network when it goes down. We go ahead and detect that outage. We dial up on the cellular modem. We get an IP address from the cellular provider, right? And we'll talk about APNs in a second, based on which APN you end up on different networks. And so then in this scenario, we're assuming you then use that APN to connect to an MPLS network, which implies that you already have a VPN in that MPLS back to your internal network. And so then we're back online, we're back talking to the control center, and your users can access the Uplogix, they can troubleshoot, they can fix things, right? So same thing, but over the cellular. Oh yeah, the cellular can also be activated on demand. In the control center, if you have, well, first of all, you need SMS service for that to work. But yeah, in the control center, if it's configured, there's a button you can click that will just send an SMS to the Uplogix. If we're looking for it on the Uplogix, we'll go ahead and turn on that out-of-band connection at that point. And we actually just recently in our 6.2 software, which just came out, we expanded the capabilities of that SMS so that you could now potentially activate the out-of-band network from your cell phone by texting the cellular modem if you configure things correctly. So, like I said, they'll mostly be automatically configured if you've got a cellular installed, but you can always run config init if you need to double check that stuff. So yeah, depending on your provider and what network you're looking to connect to, the initialization string might need to include some information. Actually, for the most part, we've moved this stuff into the APN. So when you're on a cellular network and you're connecting for a broadband internet, connection, the cell providers use APNs to assign you to different networks. And for the most part, users never ever see this on their cell phones or their tablets and things. But in these modems, we do have to sometimes configure if you're using a particular APN. You know, for example, that one at the bottom there, SO01 VZW static, right? That's the APN Verizon uses for static IPs. So if you don't have that configured properly, you don't end up on the right network, and then the cellular has no IP connectivity. So that's what the APNs do. They let the cell provider know which network to put you on, or it's rather you're requesting to be put on that network, and if you're not on the right APN, then things won't work. So that's the most common trouble we see with cell modems these days is that APN. Like I said, we can also, you know, if you don't want to use Pulse for those cell modems, if you want to activate these on demand, we have a feature for that. It uses the SMS system, so that means that, you know, those cell modems, the SIM cards in them have to have SMS service to receive those SMS messages, right? But then you basically configure the Uplogix local manager to look for those messages, right? That's that config monitor command right there. That's the type of thing we could also do en masse from the control center if we need to. But then once you need to have it come online with that, you just go to the Uplogix, go to schedule tasks, and one of the options is that SMS message. You can change the time, but otherwise there isn't much else in terms of feature or options, right? It just turns it on. And then once you send that, you know, usually within a minute or two, the Uplogix appears in out of band in the inventory with its cellular IP address and all that good stuff. Oh, and like I said, in 6.2 we expanded the capability of this a little bit. You can now use the rules engine to define what's going to trigger the SMS out of band, you know, and at that point, if you set it up with certain things, like for example, you can configure it to look for a particular phone number as the origin of the SMS message. So, you know, you could potentially do that from a cell phone in 6.2. So. Now this is what you guys are actually using for the most part at the VA. You guys are dialing in using the POTS line, and this is just pretty simple stuff. Basically, when you need to dial into an Uplogix for whatever reason, you know, you got an outage or you're doing a cutover or whatever it might be, updates, you know, you go to the control center, and once you configure a phone number for the local manager, you get a dial button that shows up next to the SSH button. And so you hit the dial button, and that connects to a remote access server, or basically a router with a modem in it. And then it dials the phone number for the local manager, right? That's all kind of pre-configured in the Uplogix control center. So when you need to connect, you just hit the button, it does everything else until you get the login prompt, right? At which point you need to enter your credentials, and then you have a serial connection to the Uplogix. I should note, this isn't a network connection. This is serial over the phone line. And so, you know, you can't really move files over that connection, but it still gives you access to our command line. You can still terminal into the systems. And ideally, all your backups are going to be in the Uplogix anyway, so, you know, you won't hopefully need to move any files anyway. So that's what you guys are doing now for the vast majority of your deployment. So, you know, just like that SMS monitors, we have a couple of different modem monitors that we can use. You know, on the V9d2s and Iridiums, we have this rule set called Modem Basic. And it looks for things like, you know, if somebody unplugs the phone line, we will detect that automatically. Or if when we test the modem and there's no dial tone on the phone line, we'll create an alarm based on that as well. We really recommend you do that on all your V9d2s, and I'm pretty sure we have that in place with you guys right now. I think we did that about 6 months ago, made sure that was running everywhere. For the cellular, there are a number of different rule sets available for there that do similar checks, right? You know, check for registration, check for signal quality, things like that. And so that way, the whole point of these monitors is we want to make sure that these out-of-band systems are available when you need them, right? So we pretty much want to continuously test them. And if we detect any problems that might prevent them from working, we go ahead and create an alarm so that you guys can, check it out and troubleshoot. A lot of the times somebody's stolen the phone line for a fax machine or something out at a site, and this will let you know so that you can fix that before it's a problem. So when you're testing, we have this great feature called PPP cycle, or outband cycle now. This is useful both for testing and also for, some people like to turn on the out of band periodically, maybe for, 1 hour out of the day, every day. We've seen all sorts of different scenarios in terms of how people want to manage this. So this feature lets us turn on the out of band connection for a certain amount of time, and then either leave it on for that certain amount of time or just do a quick heartbeat test. So the PPP cycle duration, you specify how many minutes you want it to stay on. With the PPP cycle heartbeat, it just turns on the out-of-band connection, it tries to reach the control center with its heartbeat, and then reports back success or failure for those. So that's just a quick test. Whereas the cycle duration, that could be useful if you know you need to do some quick work over out of band. You can have it just turn it on for 10 minutes, connect, do your stuff, and then it won't stay on forever if you walk away or something. So if you want to configure that, it can be done from the command line, right? If you know you're going to have an outage, you want it to turn on for a certain amount of time. This example would be 12 hours, right? So maybe you've got some, a change window. You know that there's going to be a circuit cutover or something. You can turn on the out of band for 12 hours, access it that way for however long you need, and then, um, um, turn it off when it's done. There's another great set of tools we have for testing and verifying things are looking good with your modems, and that's a Showtek. Basically what we do is, actually you have to run Pultec first, and the Uplogix will go ahead and check the modem. It'll check for a bunch of different options on it, things like, well, this is for a V9d2 here, but on the cellular we'll check for things like, is the SIM card inserted? Are we registered on the cellular network, right? What's our signal strength look like? So yeah, this Pultec and Showtek are a way to, interrogate the modem for some kind of low-level status stuff that, sometimes when things aren't working right, this is what'll give us the clue as to what the problem might be. Here's more of that output. It actually gives you about 3 pages of output at this point. Well, we already talked about this a little bit, but yeah, the secondary Ethernet can be configured for out-of-band as well. It's not, I should note, yeah, it's not turned on until we see that it needs to be turned on. So if you're using Pulse and secondary Ethernet, we don't even have the interface turned on. You won't have link or anything on it until we see that Pulse fails and we want to turn on the out-of-band, at which point secondary Ethernet comes live. Hopefully we get an IP from whatever we're connected to, and then we can connect that way. So here's that scenario. It's really similar to the others in that we're monitoring the network. When we see that there's an outage, we turn on the out-of-band. In this case, the secondary Ethernet, which in this example is connected to some sort of cable DSL ISP or alternate network, whether it's satellite backfill or whatever it might be. We'll connect to that. We'll use that network ideally to connect back into your network, either through VPN or maybe we're already in there, depending on what network infrastructure we're going through. And then at that point we reconnect to the control center. Users can log in and do what they need to do. To configure that, again, it lives in the CLI, but also config system secondary will let you do it there. And just select outband for the option. You've got either DHCP or static IP address on that. And then again, that also lives in the control center. in the GUI if you prefer to configure that there. That's what that looks like on the command line, right? We give you options for DNS if you need it. And of course, it can be turned on manually, outband, on, outband off, outband cycle. Those are all commands available to, turn that on, turn that off, or connect via pulse again. So those are all the different flavors of out of band that we currently have available. We also have this feature that works with some of those. Again, this WAN traffic feature mainly only works with the cellular modems, but it lets us share our out-of-band connection with other devices. Basically, what we do is on the Uplogix secondary Ethernet, instead of using it for our out-of-band connection or something else, we turn it into a DHCP server that hands out addresses to whatever's connected to our secondary Ethernet. That might be a router's tertiary interface or something like that. At that point, whenever the Uplogix goes out of band and uses its cellular modem, whatever is connected to that secondary Ethernet is allowed to NAT through our cellular connection. And so, whatever traffic the site wants to pass through us, back to the NOC or wherever it's going, will go through our cellular network connection there. And then, of course, your router would be configured to, fail over and use that under whatever conditions, you had for that failover. So, you do need to have, there's an option under the PPP settings to enable that out-of-band sharing. So you do have to select that. You can also do it on the command line, of course. And then what you need to do is you need to change the secondary Ethernet to DHCP server as well. And once you do that, you get some options on the bottom half of that screen, one of which lets you check the box for forward traffic over out-of-band connection. And at that point, whatever you plug into our secondary Ethernet is going to be handed an IP address and allowed to use our cellular network connection for whatever traffic it wants to send. So that's a lot of slides. Let's look at the labs a little bit. If you aren't already, maybe grab your WWT and know that we want to also look at one of the live production ones that you guys have. But first, I just kind of wanted to have you guys walk through a little bit of the configuration for these guys. And I was thinking we'd just kind of show what your main production configuration looks like. So if I log into one of these desktops, and yeah, feel free to log in and click along with this. Stuff's all still here. Grab this password in case I need it. Yeah, if you select one of the local managers, either one, it doesn't really matter. Open up the out-of-band section on the left-hand side. That'll open up the options for, the setup wizard, which is good. But a lot of the stuff's easier to do, just kind of in place. So for dial-in, for you guys, the main, pretty much all the configuration elements are going to live under the modem section here, right? And there's pretty much two parts to it. Well, there's three really. The top part, these are those answer settings, the basic settings, the config answer stuff. So if you want the Uplogix to answer phone calls, you have to enable it right here. Right? Just click Enable Dial-In. At that point, if you want, you can adjust the rings before answering. I don't know. Mostly we turn this down to 1 in production because 3 rings just is a long time when you can't hear it ringing. We also recommend you log those rings incoming. Yeah, why not? Can't hurt. We do have the option to support encryption, right? You can require it if you want, but enabled is the preference. And basically, you don't really have to set anything up from that. That's going to use our applet through to the system on the other side to do some encryption of that dial-up connection. So that's nice because otherwise, like I said, those are just serial over the phone line. So this gives you a little privacy over the telco network. Now, ringback and callback, these are features that, ringback, if that's enabled, it will not answer the first call. It will only answer if you call back within the specified time frame in seconds, right? So if I were to do this, I could dial once, it's not going to answer, but then I have to dial back within 90 seconds for it to then pick up the phone. Right? That's ringback. Callback is similar, except for that it will then trigger a PPP connection, which you guys don't have, so and almost nobody does anymore. If you want it to actually answer your incoming calls, right, we have to do either some whitelisting in this allowed and denied numbers, or a lot of people will just, allow all. You're not, you're still going to a username password prompt when you dial in anyway, but you can, right here if you need to. And this might be good for you guys because you're only having two different modems dial into these systems, I think. So you can set up the allowed numbers just like that, and then anything else will not be allowed to dial in, or rather, it won't answer calls from any other phone numbers. So then this is the other big part here, the modem pool. Here's where we tell the Uplogix where your modem is going to be that we're going to use to dial out. Right, so we give it an IP here, right? Where we can be connecting to a TCP port, or sometimes you're connecting to a range of ports. So you might be port 22 through, I don't know, 42, right? That's if you've got 20 different modems on this modem bank. It would look something like that. If we're using SSH or Telnet, we're going to need a username and password probably when we connect to that modem. So, whatever that might be. And you can further restrict things with, some allowed SSH fingerprints, right? That obviates the need for the username and password. And then for the init string, you need to give it the phone number that you're actually going to dial. So this is the phone number of the phone line that the Uplogix is connected to out there. So whatever that might be. And once you have that configured, once you've told it where the modem is that they're going to dial from and what the phone number is that they're going to dial, if you hit save, at that point you have this new dial button up here on the control center. And so this blue dial button, what it'll do is it's just like the SSH button, but it's going to connect to whatever we configured for that modem, and it's going to, in this case, try and SSH to that system. Now I just put in a spoof IP, so it's not going to connect to anything here. But I do want to show you guys on kind of, just what it looks like here. If it was able to connect, it would dial the phone number then, and then once the Uplogix answered, I would get the same username password prompt that I get when I SSH to it.
All right.
Okay, well, thanks again, everybody, and y'all have a good afternoon.